If your radishes keep giving you beautiful green tops but almost no bulbs under the soil, then you are probably making one mistake that thousands of gardeners repeat every single spring without even knowing it. I made the same mistake myself for years, and I kept thinking the seeds were bad or the weather was to blame, but the real problem was much simpler than that. You spend weeks watering and checking your garden every morning only to pull up a plant that looks healthy above the ground, while the root underneath is no bigger than your little finger. That is frustrating, because you did the work, but you never got the harvest you expected. The good news is that radishes are not difficult plants and they do not ask for expensive fertilizers or special equipment. They only ask for a few simple things done at the right time. Once I understood that, my harvest changed so much that I started filling baskets instead of handfuls. Today, I want to walk you through the 8 mistakes that quietly steal your crop before you even notice there is a problem. Most people never connect these mistakes with poor bulbs because the leaves look strong and healthy. They think more leaves must mean a better harvest, but with radishes that is often the first warning sign that something is wrong below the surface. An old gardener showed me this many years ago, and he smiled when he pulled up a perfect round radish while mine looked like thin white roots with a forest of leaves on top. He told me that a radish cannot hide the truth. It always shows you what happened in the soil if you know where to look. That simple lesson stayed with me ever since. None of what I will share costs much money, and most of it costs nothing at all because these are old habits that people used long before garden centers were full of colorful bags and bottles. If you stay with me until the end, you will know exactly why your radishes grow leaves instead of bulbs, and you will also learn which mistake almost everyone makes first, because fixing that one alone can completely change the next harvest. The first mistake is giving radishes soil that is too rich in nitrogen, and I see this happen every year because people want to help their plants grow faster. They add fresh manure or a strong fertilizer, and then they stand back waiting for a big harvest. What they get instead is a patch full of thick green leaves and almost nothing worth pulling from the ground. Radishes are different from tomatoes or peppers. They do not need to spend weeks building large plants before making fruit. Their job is to grow a healthy root quickly, and if you push them toward leaf growth, they will happily do that instead. I learned this lesson after one season when I planted 2 short rows only a few feet apart. One row received compost that had finished breaking down months earlier, and the other received fresh manure because I thought more food would mean bigger radishes. The difference surprised me. The first row gave me smooth round bulbs that were crisp and full of flavor, while the second row looked impressive from a distance because the leaves were twice as large. When I pulled them up, almost every root was thin and disappointing. That was the day I stopped feeding radishes the way I fed other vegetables. Another mistake that many people make is loosening only the top layer of soil. A radish cannot become round if it meets hard-packed ground just a few inches below the surface. Even if the seed sprouts well, the root will struggle to expand, and it often grows long and narrow instead of forming the bulb you are waiting for. Before I sow seeds, I always loosen the soil a little deeper than I think I need. It takes only a few extra minutes, but it gives every root room to grow naturally. I do not chase expensive products because this simple habit has given me better results than anything sold in a bottle. Very few people pay attention to these 2 details because healthy leaves make them believe everything is going well. The truth stays hidden until harvest day, and by then it is too late to fix the problem. But these are only the beginning, because the next mistake is even more common, and it can ruin an entire bed of radishes even when your soil is almost perfect. Another mistake that quietly ruins a radish harvest is planting the seeds too close together, because it feels wasteful to leave empty space in the garden. I understand that feeling because I used to think every inch of soil should be filled with plants. Then I noticed something strange. The rows that looked the fullest always gave me the smallest roots. The plants were fighting each other every single day for light water and room to grow, even though I could not see it happening. Their leaves became crowded and the roots had nowhere to expand. An older neighbor noticed me pulling tiny radishes one spring and asked a simple question. "Did you ever thin them after they came up?" I looked at him and said no because I hated pulling healthy little seedlings. He smiled and told me that keeping every plant usually means harvesting almost nothing worth eating. The next season, I finally listened. As soon as the seedlings grew their first true leaves, I gently removed the weaker ones until there was enough space between each plant. At first, the row looked almost empty, and I wondered if I had made a mistake. A few weeks later, those remaining plants produced some of the biggest and smoothest radishes I had ever grown. That small sacrifice at the beginning gave me a much larger harvest in the end. Most people skip this step because they feel they are wasting seeds, but seeds are much cheaper than losing an entire crop. There is another habit that causes trouble as well, and that is waiting too long to water after the soil has completely dried out. Radishes like steady moisture not soaking wet soil, and not long dry periods followed by heavy watering. When the soil swings from dry to wet, the roots become stressed. Sometimes they split. Sometimes they stay small. Sometimes they become hot and bitter instead of crisp and mild. I stopped following a fixed watering schedule years ago. Instead, I simply touch the soil with my fingers. If it feels dry a little below the surface, I water deeply and then leave it alone until it begins to dry again. It is an old habit that costs nothing and works better than guessing. Many gardeners never realize that these simple daily decisions matter more than expensive products. But there is one mistake that surprises almost everyone, because it starts before the seed even touches the ground, and it decides the future of the harvest from the very first day. One of the biggest mistakes happens before you even open the seed packet, and that is planting radishes at the wrong time of the season. I know it is tempting to sow them as soon as you have a free space in the garden, or whenever you remember to do it, but radishes have their own schedule, and they do not care about ours. Many people wait until the weather becomes warm because it feels more comfortable to work outside. Then they wonder why the plants grow fast leaves and almost no bulbs. Radishes are cool weather vegetables, and once the days become too warm, they begin thinking about survival instead of building a nice round root. They rush to produce flowers and seeds because that is how nature tells them to continue the next generation. At that point, the root stops developing. The texture becomes tough and the flavor turns much stronger than most people enjoy. Years ago, an older gardener told me something I never forgot. He said, "If you are comfortable working in a short sleeve shirt all afternoon, your radishes are probably wishing they had been planted weeks earlier." I laughed when he said it, but after trying different planting dates, I realized he was right. Since then, I sow my first crop as soon as the soil can be worked in spring, and another crop when the weather begins cooling again toward the end of summer. Those two planting windows have given me far better harvests than trying to grow radishes through the hottest part of the year. There is another small habit that has helped me for many seasons. Instead of planting every seed on the same day, I sow a short row every week or so. It takes only a few extra minutes, but it means I harvest fresh radishes over a much longer period instead of having everything ready at once. This old method was common years ago because families wanted steady, fresh food instead of one large harvest that quickly became too old. Very few gardeners still do this, even though it saves money and makes much better use of a small garden. You do not need special equipment or expensive products to make it work. You only need a little patience and good timing. But even when you plant at exactly the right moment, there is another mistake hiding underground that quietly ruins the shape, taste, and size of your radishes before you even realize anything is wrong. The next mistake is one that many people never notice because it is hidden below the surface, and that is leaving stones, clumps of hard soil, or old roots where you plant your radishes. A radish wants to grow into one smooth round root, but the moment it hits something solid, it has to change direction. Instead of becoming full, and even it twists, bends, or stays small because it spends its energy trying to find a way around the obstacle. I learned this after planting one bed in freshly prepared soil and another in an older part of the garden where I hurried the job because I thought it looked good enough. The seeds came up well in both places, and at first there was almost no difference. Then harvest day arrived. The carefully prepared bed gave me clean round radishes that were easy to pull and looked exactly the way I hoped. The other bed was full of strange shapes with split roots and many plants that never developed proper bulbs at all. Since then, I always take a few extra minutes before planting to remove stones, old weeds, and anything else that might block the roots. It is simple work, but it saves weeks of disappointment later. Another mistake is leaving weeds to grow alongside your radishes because they compete for water, light, and nutrients from the very beginning. Many gardeners wait until the weeds become large before removing them, but by then the damage has already been done. I like to pull small weeds while they are still easy to remove. It takes only a few minutes every few days and the garden stays clean without much effort. An old gardener once told me that weeds are easiest to remove the day before you think they need pulling. I have remembered that advice for many years because it has always proved true. You do not need expensive weed barriers or chemical sprays when you stay ahead of the problem. A little attention every week is often enough. Most people are looking for one miracle product that fixes everything, but healthy radishes usually come from several small habits done consistently. These habits cost almost nothing, yet they produce results that many people never achieve with costly garden products. Still, there is one final mistake that often surprises even experienced gardeners because it happens at harvest time itself, and it can change the flavor, texture, and quality of every radish you pull from the ground. The last mistake that keeps many gardeners from enjoying a great harvest is waiting too long before pulling the radishes from the ground. I understand why people do it, because it feels natural to think that if you leave them another week, they will become even bigger. That sounds reasonable, but with radishes it often works the opposite way. Instead of becoming larger and sweeter, they become woody, inside hollow in the middle, or much hotter than they should be. I learned this lesson after leaving a beautiful row untouched because I was busy with other work around the garden. When I finally came back, I expected the best harvest of the season. Instead, many of the radishes had cracked, and the texture was so tough that they were no longer enjoyable to eat. Since then, I never judge a radish only by the leaves. I gently brush away a little soil around one or two plants every few days to see how the roots are developing. If they have reached the size I want, I begin harvesting right away instead of waiting for every single one to become perfect. That simple habit has saved many of my crops. Another old method that has served me well is harvesting little by little instead of clearing the whole bed at once. The largest roots come out first, and the smaller ones get a few more days to finish growing. This gives every plant the best chance to reach its full size without becoming old. Very few people still use this method even though it costs nothing and makes much better use of a small garden. I have found that gardening is often about paying attention instead of working harder. The small details make the biggest difference. Good soil, steady moisture, enough space, cool weather, careful timing, and harvesting at the right moment all work together. None of these steps are difficult and none require expensive products. They are simple habits that have been passed from one gardener to another for generations because they continue to work. Once I stopped looking for shortcuts and started following these old methods, my radishes became more reliable every season. The leaves were still healthy, but now there were beautiful crisp bulbs waiting underneath the soil where they belonged. And there is one final thought that changed the way I look at every vegetable in my garden, because the lesson I learned from growing better radishes turned out to improve almost everything else I planted as well. When I look back at all the seasons I have spent in the garden, I realize that the biggest improvements never came from expensive tools or special products. They came from understanding what each plant was quietly asking for. Radishes taught me that lesson better than almost anything else I have grown. They showed me that healthy leaves do not always mean a healthy harvest, and that small mistakes repeated every season can quietly steal the results you have been working toward. Once I corrected those mistakes, everything became much easier. I stopped wasting seeds because more of them produced good roots. I stopped wasting water because I learned to keep the soil evenly moist instead of soaking it one day and forgetting it the next. I stopped buying products that promised miracle harvests because simple habits gave me better results than anything I could find on a store shelf. Every spring I still follow the same routine. I prepare loose soil. I avoid too much nitrogen. I give the plants enough space. I keep weeds under control while they are still small. I water consistently. I harvest at the right moment instead of waiting too long. These old methods have worked for generations because they respect the way the plant naturally grows. They are simple enough for anyone to follow, whether you have a large vegetable garden or only a few small raised beds. The best part is that they save both time and money while giving you a harvest you can actually enjoy. If your last crop gave you only leaves, do not be discouraged because every gardener has been there at least once. The important thing is knowing what to change before the next planting. I hope that the next time you pull a radish from the ground, you feel the same satisfaction I still feel after all these years when a smooth, firm root comes out of the soil exactly as it should. Gardening is not about being perfect. It is about learning one small lesson at a time and using that knowledge season after season. Once you see the difference these simple changes make, you will start noticing the same pattern with many other vegetables in your garden. And that is exactly what I hope to share with you in the next video, because another forgotten old method has helped me grow stronger, healthier vegetables with less work than I ever thought possible.